So, John, in the first segment, we were walking through, really, in many respects, the failures of borders to function in many places around the world. We also discussed that the concept that the United States has not had, and of course, when we say open borders, we're not saying get rid of borders, keep borders so that people know what laws they're subject to, what the speed limit is in certain areas, right? Mm-hmm. Like the concept is really built on the borders between Massachusetts and New York, or, the Florida and Georgia, or whatever it is, state to state. There are borders. There are implications to those borders, but people can pass freely through them. And we are, capable as human beings to understand, like, now I'm in Florida. So, my speed limit may be different. Or now I'm in, New York. So my apple cider needs to be pasteurized. Whatever those differences are, people can accept them. But there are some not just arguments that we can handle this, but there are ethical, environmental, and economic arguments for open borders. We've touched a little bit on the ethical, but there's more to that.
Yeah, there's plenty more to that. I think like some context is really important here. So, open borders, as you sort of said in your intro, has become it's become basically political kryptonite. And the left hasn't been able to put forth any sort of alternative to this incredible militarization of the borders. And they've, both in the 2013 and 2005 comprehensive immigration reform debates, they really have capitulated to the status quo of border militarization. And what that does is it results in people dying. And so, this is touching on the ethical argument. So since 2000, at least 7,000 people have died crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. At least. Those are the people that we know of. Then when you look more globally, just since 2014, there's been at least 60,000 people worldwide who have gone missing or have died because of militarized borders throughout the globe. So there is, a lot of the knee-jerk reaction you're talking about is on the left. I'm not for open borders, but I'm for a more humane immigration policy. But rolling back Trumpism to pre-2017 isn't enough. You have to go much more than that. I think the point here is that a humane immigration policy is open borders. And as long as you have a border, as long as you have a wall, you're going to have family separation. You're going to have people dying. You're going to be inflicting trauma on tens of thousands of people in immigration detention centers, or as they're trying to hide from immigration authorities and get across the border. So that's, again, I think that is really important to emphasize on the ethical side. Then when you get to the economic side, and we were talking a little bit about integration, there's a couple natural experiments that we can look at here. One was in 1980 during the Mariel boat lift, when about 100,000 Cubans came to Miami in a very short period of time. And there's been a number of studies and counter studies that have looked at this economic result of what happened. And in the end, it seems like there was no wage depression or employment depression. And, there might have been some small sector of the economy that had a slight negative, some negative repercussions. But if we think smartly about this, we could compensate those people. So there's a recent study that said per migrant that comes to the United States, there's 1.2 jobs that are created as they enter into the formal economy. So, and also, when a sort of big picture study about open borders, what it would actually mean for the global economy, was estimating a $40 trillion rise in global GDP. So, a lot of these figures are a little bit contentious, but what we look at is no anti-open borders or pro-immigration enforcement economist is making a clear or credible argument for an actual depression of wages or a loss of jobs because of migration. And then extending a little bit further into integration, like people are worried about, welfare or how these migrants are going to be taking up services. And, I'm relying on Michael Clemens, who's a really smart analyst on this issue with Migration Policy Institute. And he points to Medicare. And before you can access Medicare, you either have to have been here for 10 years paying into the system or pay in right away. And there can be a pretty simple fix to someone's fear or like allaying someone's fear, saying, well, if all these migrants come, all of a sudden they're going to bleed all these social welfare programs completely dry. But, we can be smart about it and say, like, well, if you come here right away and you want to use some of these benefits, you have to pay in a little bit. And that isn't completely blocking them or denying their humanity and sending them into the shadows. That's just thinking about a smart way of integrating them. And we don't have to just shout at each other and say, like, it's got to be all or nothing. We can consider very reasonable alternatives like this that are sort of a middle ground about once people are here, because at least 11 million people are here without documentation, how to integrate them in a fair way.
Right. And look, I mean, the dynamic of social insurance becoming more efficient and effective and cost effective as you expand the risk pool is, this is basic elementary here. If you have more people paying in, it's going to help these systems like Medicare and Social Security. In addition, obviously, to expending the money that you expend on the militarization of the border on more socially valuable expenditures. Right. It's just It's much better to spend money on a light rail system in a city than having to pay and to have and pay the personnel to operate it than having a bunch of guys and women stand around with guns for no reason at the border. I mean, it's just it's a much more productive expenditure of our assets. So, I mean, are we anywhere? We just have about a minute left here. I mean, are we anywhere close to any mainstream politicians sort of saying, like, you know what, I'm not afraid to go and make this very basic argument, which is we open up the borders. We can still stamp passports and whatnot, but we don't need to militarize it. And we figure out a way of integrating immigrants into this country. But we're not going to get hundreds of thousands of people amassed at the border. It may increase a little bit, but maybe it balances out because people get kicked out, come back in. I mean, who knows? But are we anywhere close to that?
I don't think so. Like as I said, I think most of the mainstream Democratic candidates really haven't put forward any sort of plan. There a couple are rolling out right now. Cory Booker just laid out his plan a couple days ago. Joaquin Castro as well. But Bernie Sanders recently also said, I'm not for open borders. But I think that there has been just a dearth of serious consideration on the topic. And I don't think we can wait for our politicians to look hard at it and think about it. I think we need to make the argument either as journalists to look hard and define the terms, or as people and advocates who want to find a humane way to control immigration,
well said, John. Well said.
Thanks.
And I appreciate your time and discussing this with us.